Is that correct?
Uh,
Or different
yeah,
shapes, inversions?
yeah. Look, what it is it's talking about um, inner, outer, and middle voice movement.
Okay.
Um, hold on. Inner is middle. Outer is top and bottom. So I said the same thing like three different ways. Um, so like we'll talk about this in a second when we get some other people plugged in. If anyone else is joining.
I can
Um,
see Will's here.
does it?
I can see Will's here.
Oh yeah, Will is here. Um, so I'll give it a couple more minutes because we're technically early at this stage.
Yeah.
So other than today's stuff, how have you been going? What have you been doing to kind of incorporate some stuff you've been playing? How's it been going, bringing this into your practice?
I'd say all right. I've been a bit lazy sometimes, just not practicing some days, and then some days I've been trying to do it a lot more. But yeah, I guess it's all right.
Yeah, I mean, look, someone who's taken from someone who's been doing it for a really long time, you do go through these flag periods where you don't pick it up so much, or you can't really bring yourself to do it. Um, it's really difficult while you're at uni, like while you're studying under someone else's gun. Like it's harder to have that choice. And one of the things that uni should be kind of pushing you towards is a kind of discipline that makes you, reliably work on this stuff because you're paying thousands of dollars for it.
Mhm.
So it's something to bear in mind. One of the reasons why I've never really enjoyed institutionalized study is part of that. I'm a really great study, but I have to move at a pace that I'm comfortable with, which is usually much faster than what happens in the classroom. But on top of that, there are periods where like I need to break, and you don't have that option
Yeah.
necessarily when you're with an institution. Um, Not that it's great, uh, your marks don't matter to me personally. What I want you to do is take away some ideas that you can then practice for many, many years. Like thinking that anyone would be able to master this stuff inside a year and, suddenly be Joe Pass is a bit stupid. I think it's bizarre that, it's like week 2 or something, you guys have a Dorian improvisation exam. um, I like every time that this course starts, the same response comes out of students. They're like, 1, what the hell are modes? And 2, what the hell is improvisation? Like, how do I use this to do this? And I'm like, yeah, I really don't blame you for feeling out of the depth. It's, on the other hand, if you go back to even when I was doing the HSC, you wouldn't have been able to get into any school without an audition that already required you to do something like that. So the expected knowledge back then was higher than it is now. So, swings and roundabouts. Can you, as of yet, say, when you have been practicing this stuff, what have you been doing? It's an open question, guys.
Personally, I've been again working on like 2 strings at a time. So you do stuff up and down 2 strings, and then we've been working on inversions and stuff. So I've been working on just adding like sharp 9s on top of chords, or adding different type of inversions to kind of.
Can you play any examples of like something you're working on?
Oh wait, that's something like that. I think that's like a sharp 9. I've been trying. Oh.
That's Dom 7.
Huh? Is that Dom 7?
Dom 7, yeah.
I just.
Sharp 9, here, sharp 9 would be this. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry. That's flat 9. I always do this to myself. Sharp 9 is the minor third.
Oh, that's right.
Flat 9 is sharp and root.
Yeah, I just stupid myself. Yeah.
Yeah, so you took a chord progression, right? And you're trying to play around with some extensions.
Yeah, trying to. I forget which one. I think it's one of the first ones, but I'm blanking on it now. I think it was one of the first ones that we done.
Oh, like Ninja.
I think that was it. I think that was it. I'm just blanking on it right now.
Yeah, okay. How about other guys? You and Will, what you been doing with your practice? How you been going incorporating some of this stuff that you're playing? Give me some examples of what you've been doing in your practice.
I think you're just tuning, so I'll go if you want. Yeah, the past sort of week maybe I haven't done a lot of practice, but last night I was transcribing some Sonny Rollins, sort of the style of his solo. Like I only did it for like 20 minutes or something before I went to bed. I'm trying to think of what else I've been doing. I was like fourths, like the Dorian sort of fourths, like the Love Supreme sort of sound.
Right, yeah.
That was something I was so just getting the hang of hearing, and it sort of comes out in the improvisation. Uh, I'm not trying to force it so much.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
know,
sort
like
of
I
blank.
think, look, everyone that I've seen in this course so far could do themselves a huge favor by spending a lot more time worrying about simple concepts, like worrying about just improvising on triad tones, or
Yep.
because like, you know, I remember having all the impulses to find all of the most interesting shit in the world to play, and it's very good for you, and there's no reason why you should stop doing that necessarily. But what will be very difficult is for it to come out naturally in your playing.
Yep. Yeah.
And a focus on simpler ideas will allow you to bring those things out much easier.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the caveat. Like I'd be like, you know, even with transcription, I honestly think transcription is over advised to people. I have like, you know, I've learned tons of jazz songs across the course of my life, and it took me really focusing in on just basic chord tones before I was able to really construct lines that made sense as a jazz player and didn't just sound like non sequiturs that would come in and out. Like you can see, oh yeah, that's lick A from this song, and that's lick B from that song, and they kind of have this weird jagged cross section where they come in. So it's all of that stuff that we've been talking about, this term of really focusing in on your basic chord tones and constructing simple melodies,
Mm-hmm.
that you guys should all do a lot of, an awful lot of. And the more of that you do, the more those other esoteric concepts will come together. On that note, though, talking about weird esoteric concepts, have you done chordal harmony for your pentatonic?
No, I don't think so. I'm
You
not quite
totally
sure what
should.
you mean by that. Sorry.
So, like,
Sorry.
okay, so if you take like box one, right, and you harmonize that chordally, you can come up with really cool, you know,
Yeah.
like, and they're really easy to make work. So, like, you know, you're playing some kind of like, you know, blues cover with your friends, and that they're fun to bust out. And because it's kind of pentatonic scaffolds, there's enough of that in your ear already that you don't need to like really think about it too much. It's quite easy to lean on. So it's just taking, you know, your pentatonics with chordal harmony.
Yeah. Well,
Stuff like that.
I was. So
No, you go.
yeah. After learning, like, I sort of just stumbled across that like force thing, the Dorian thing. But I worked on applying that to a blues, and then I just improvised, and like maybe three-quarters of the way through improvising, it sort of just came out like a couple of little things like that. But of course, it's not something you want to use all the time. Like it's much
Yeah, I mean,
better
like,
to.
you know, look, any $5 flavor, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's a refined taste, you know, like, so you've got to use it in the right moments. And it's a bit like, have you done things with, like, say, pentatonic off different notes in the triad?
No, sorry.
Oh, yeah, everyone should play with that. Like, this is, hold on, I am recording good. Am I on original sound too? That's the next thing. Yeah, so like if you're going to say play over G7 chord, the first thing you probably do is right, like box 2. But all of your different pentatonic boxes, depending on how you root them or depending on how you think about them, can express different qualities of the extensions. So like a really common one is minor pentatonic off the 5th. So you get like, so I'm actually playing D minor pentatonic across a G7 chord. And you can do similar things with like off the 3rd. So like the way I normally think of that one is whatever your low string bass is, if you play box 3 pentatonic, like box 3 pentatonic highlights flat 7, 4, and 9. So you're making it an 11 sound, but it has no 3rd in it. So you can use it unisex against any chord. So if you play a minor chord, sounds great. It sounds like a minor 9, minor 11 sound. If you play a dominant chord, right, it still highlights those same 11 sounds. So you're going to get, it's a cool approach to using some very familiar concepts. But the same kind of idea applies. Like usually you probably want to start in Vanilla Town and then go to Flavor Town, and use flavor sparingly. You know, it could also be a great way of kind of looking at your neck in different lights, because now on this G7, like we've got major, we've got minor, we've got right. Starting to like build up a list of a whole bunch of different options. And the way I would suggest you do it is look at your extensions and try to find out different places where pentatonic boxes can line up with that. Right? So that's kind of doing, it's going to be strange because I'm putting major 7th in it. So if that was a major 7th. Right? Using box 4 highlights major 7th, 6, and 9. So you're getting kind of a major 9 sound. If I did a major 7 again, or major 13, and I play box 1 starting off the major 7th, I'll do that so I can root it somewhere. So I'm getting a Lydian sound, right? Because I'm doing major 7 with 6, 9, and flat 5. Augmented 4th, however you want to think about it. So there's a lot of cool voicings that you can get out of that, and that's a lot of that Larry Carlton and Robin Ford sound. Those guys, they really, really hit that stuff pretty hard. So totally separate from what we're talking about in terms of this semester's work, but stuff you should definitely look at, because you can translate a whole bunch of language you already know into a bunch of much more highfalutin concepts. And it will get you some of those cool outside the box things going on.
Yeah. Thank you.
No, that's cool. The other thing I did with chordal a while ago, not quite chordal, is like I took a minor 11 sound and wanted to figure out a way of kind of playing that as a scale. So using those kind of chordal frameworks, you can get a whole bunch of really beautiful kind of chord sounds. And because they're pretty ambiguous, kind of open, airy chordal sound, because a lot of the harmonies in them are chordal. Occasionally there's like a 2, and occasionally there's a 3. They work kind of really well, kind of unisex, and you can use them as a kind of a way of traveling the neck. So that's something else to look into too, is like thinking of like a G minor 11th sound. Now, an interesting thing is you can take the same set of chords and turn them into something else too. It's like an A dominant. And for some reason there they sound crazy bright. But like there it sounds really kind of melancholic. So you take the same chain of those inversions and you can route them differently depending on if you can think of an association into major 7th, dominant 7th, and minors. And they're really cool splashes of flavor in the same way that kind of chordal stuff can be. Ewan, how about you, mate?
Yeah, hey, sorry. Alright, well, frankly, practicing not quite enough. Got a lot of, got a lot of other stuff going on, but that's, I should be practicing more regardless. When I am practicing stuff relevant to this course, a lot of it's focused on staying on the chord tones, is something you were talking to me about last lesson when improvising, because
Yeah.
I have a thing of emphasizing non-chord tones, because to my ears I like how that sounds, but I can get like I see how
Yeah,
going.
I mean, like, look, it is a complicated topic, isn't it? Because technically, any note in a scale will go with any chord, and you'll get different expressions of what that is. The thing that I think dwelling on basic chord tones first does for you is it highlights when you play something that is an advanced chord sound, you know what it is, what it's doing, and what its function is. Up until you really focus on those things, it's kind of just something that's kind of like, yeah, it's cool. It's something cool that I like.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't necessarily, it's not necessarily bad, but you can hear the difference in a player that understands what they're doing and one who's kind of stumbling onto what they're doing.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm advocating for it. It's not that you don't use other tones. It's just that when you are using other tones, you need to know that they are, one, other tones, and two, like, functionally what that's doing. Like, I really love the sound of a 9, you know? I find that's a really inspirational sound that's really easy to start building melodies from. And it's technically a clash, right? Like, it's a tone apart. It doesn't make it wrong, but what it does say to me immediately, one of the reasons why it's so inspirational for me is it immediately demands some kind of movement. Like, you can feel tension there.
Yeah.
And because it's created that tension, you either hold on to it to increase and ratchet the tension up, or it immediately implies that you've got to be going somewhere. And again, here I am on the 6 of the 6? Hey, no, the 4. The 4 of E. And again, that's creating a lot of tension, so it's implying that I've got to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
If I don't know that about it, and I treat it the wrong way, like I create a line that then resolves here, it will normally sound weird rather than like you have command on the concept.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why, like, I advocate for going back to basics is that by going back to basics, you really understand what things are consonant, what things are dissonant, how things function, really, and how you can hear, oh wait, no, this is an interesting tone against this chord, rather than like a chord tone chord. And one of the biggest mistakes I see a lot of people do is you learn modes and that's what comes out, and it's like, well, I was playing this chord, so ending on that note was an interesting thing. Like, the mode might say that it was okay, but that's a bizarre choice. And that's just because your fingers dictated where you're going to go rather than your ear going, well, this run needed to end here. So yeah. So when you are doing that, how are you working on it?
Well, uh, as I said, not as much as I should. When I am, it's frankly, it's over songs I usually listen to, so in my kind of a style. And it's generally over the not lead guitar sections, because I find when I try and improvise over sections where a lead guitar line's already been written, I kind of default to default back to how that already sounds. So I'm focusing on the triad a lot, and how do I put it? I mean, I'm trying not to play too fast, I guess. Like I'm trying to linger on fifths and thirds, a lot. Whereas usually, if I was lingering on a third, I'd go up to a fourth or down to a second usually. So I'm just kind of teaching myself to stick to the triad, and I don't know. I just play less. Stop thinking what I'm
Yeah. Look,
playing. I guess.
for a lot of players, playing less is a great piece of advice. Um, for so one thing I would say to you is practice in more genres than your own.
Yeah.
You know,
I know. I know. I should.
yeah. Look, it could be a rocky start, and it can feel kind of dodgy because it's like your vocab doesn't work anymore, and now I'm speaking in a slightly different language to what I'm used to. But some lessons are much clearer in some genres than in others. Um, all of you should take up classical guitar seriously to the point where you could sit like an associate diploma exam. Um, I can't tell you how beneficial learning classical music was to an understanding of melody and harmony and fluidity and expression on the instrument that just gets totally overlooked in many ways with pop music. Um, and not necessarily overlooked by the greatest players of the genre, but overlooked in its teaching and its learning. There are very, very, very few examples of someone talking about, say, a pop melody where they're like, look, if I play it here, it sounds this way, and if I play it here, it means something different. If I connect these two notes in this kind of way, or I create a swell across this section, it changes the meaning of the line, right? And that's all the kind of stuff that is all you're allowed to really focus in when you learn classical music. So I can't recommend that highly enough, but even just like creating dodgy melodies from like jingles in the 20s as just like an exercise. Um, you know, I always think of like crappy country licks. Um, those kind of things are really great at driving home these cheesy chord tone ideas. That's where you branch out from in other genres. You need to have this kind of backing of, oh, I'm grounded in this kind of simplicity. And once that is really solid, it's very easy to start understanding how all of these other fruitier, higher concept stuff plays in. Um, so definitely expand your genre palette. And you don't ever have to perform in these things, but just listening to them and kind of trying to interpret them with your hands is going to be hugely beneficial to your writing. I mean, usually if one person only studies one genre, their music sounds a particular way. It sounds like someone who's been too heavily invested in an in-joke. All of the greatest players of all time tend to have diverse tastes. I mean, I was watching this interview with John Mayer talk about the kind of shit that he's listening to. And it's like at the moment, he's doing a massive Bill Evans kick. Um, you know, lots of great players. Like there was a computer game reviewer who said, like, you want to know what it is to be creative. Your mind is a fertile garden, right? So you've just got to just keep planting and keep fertilizing it with all kinds of different pieces of information. And it's the amalgamation of what you take from the disparate sources that is going to turn into something that is creative and interesting. And the problem with just eating, one type of food your whole life is that you get stuck in certain limitations that are kind of unhealthy. If you only ever eat carrots across your life, believe me, you'll turn orange. My mum did it. Yeah, that looked right. Yeah, it was a weird month. Beta carotene and the chemicals in tomatoes too, they can turn you different colors, turn your skin different colors just from the amount of the pigments in them. So yeah, everyone should branch out. You know, like you should definitely learn to play things in genres you feel uncomfortable in, and experiment around with them. Nothing will be better for your writing and your playing. And I can't tell you how much. Just certain things are easier to learn in certain genres than they are in others. Um, so like definitely branch out. Unlike, branch out to something close to your stuff, your wheelhouse first, and then get more and more outside the box. Okay, today's lesson. Have we all got the sheet up for today's lesson? Should be some sight reading. There's no words on it at all. Yep, all got it up. All right. Does anyone notice anything about the exercises? So, one thing I should say to everyone is when you are sight reading, especially on the guitar, because it is a nasty instrument to sight read for. You want to look at the page first and try to digest some of the information before you even start playing anything. So, what can you tell me about what you can observe here? And we are looking for like obvious comments here. It's important to like tick off the obvious boxes inside your head. Any observations at all? Just so you know, we're going to read this on the DGB strings, just because I have been hammering home the DGB strings very hard across this semester, so it's kind of like fair to keep it all on DGB. So seriously, nobody can recognize anything about this.
So I guess it's starting like, and then
All right, but don't play it. So like things
okay.
to note for yourself, right?
Yeah.
We see inversions. What inversion does it start on? Just looking at it.
The C major in first inversion.
First inversion. We all know the cheat. If it's got one off by itself, it's first inversion. If it has two off by itself, it's second inversion. They're all together, it's root inversion, right? The other thing is, what about the fact that it's a scale? All right, it's just a trajectory of notes from C. The first one is from C to C. The next one is from G to G. The last one is from E to E. Okay? These little things that you acknowledge to yourself are really, really handy for reading on this instrument. You know, you can do a lot of your legwork intellectually before you worry about, say, even reading the notes. I mean, looking at that on that top line, you can see, well, it's a scale that starts on C. There's no sharps or flats, so it has to be the C scale. And we're going to start with inversions on 1, 3, 5, and 8. All right? Even without reading the notes of those chords, you can kind of figure out what that's going to be. Right? Intellectually. You've got to support your reading with any of your knowledge. You know, if you see something's in the key of B flat, you should go, oh, I can see all my B flat scales on the neck because I learned all my modes. So I know where all these things are. If it goes in scale-wise motion, it's going to move in these patterns that I already know. And you've got to like think the dumb thoughts first before you pick up something and try it. Because when you try it, you're going to get, especially as beginner readers, you're just going to get locked into what are these notes. And it's not necessarily that helpful in the same way that when you look at words on a page, you don't say, what is this letter? Right? Like you kind of read the whole letter all at once. And if you think in those ways, like you identify inversions first, we haven't even got up to reading true guitar music yet, which is confusing as hell. This is a difficult instrument to read for, not least of all because you can find the same line in at least 3 different places on the neck. But there's probably also 20 different fingerings of every line you could come up with. On top of that, it has quite a large range, and it's all compressed on the treble stave, so it can be a bit tricky to read for. In this kind of simpler music, you can really, cut your workload to be fractions of what it is. Okay, so what I would like everyone to do, and it shouldn't take everyone very long, is run through all of these reading exercises. The way it's going to go is we're going to look at top voice movement, middle voice movement, and lower voice movement. What you want to do is sing the top notes, preferably. You play them as well, but we're not after good sounds, we're just after stuff that works, predicting it with your ear. And then middle voice. One thing that you might find difficult right now, and something you'll probably need to work on, is singing the middle voice. The middle voice is the hardest to sing in any point. And I'm quite a good harmony singer. I can usually do them on the fly. And doing top line harmonies has always been the easiest thing for me. But the next easiest, surprisingly, is the bottom voice harmony. Ones that are kind of tricky and you end up getting pulled into different directions is your middle voice. So, and your lower voice. Oh, my capo is like slowly covering up my camera. Okay, so everyone have a run through those exercises. We're just on the DGB strings. If you are lost and you don't know how to read those notes, then one, this is a great exercise for you. Two, it's a C major scale. So a good place to start would be going. Oh, you can hear the intonation. I'm really got to restring this thing. And then middle voice, right? Oh, sorry, I'm not doing a G chord. I keep thinking I'm doing a G. The next two exercises, as we come down, are going to be the same scales, the same voice moving, but we're going to harmonize them with the 4 and the 5 chord. So, I don't know. Let's take a look. Say the first one. We'll get a couple of minutes to make sure you've kind of run through them, and then we'll move on to the 4 chord. Yeah, we're doing okay. Now, all your mics are muted, guys, so you should definitely be practicing the singing component of this as you're doing it as well. No one can hear you, it's fine. But I can't tell you how much singing / humming / even whistling really, really, really helps your playing. So it's just something you got to get used to as you practice. And you sound like you're in a coffee shop, so I understand if you're not doing it. But it's either a coffee shop or a war zone. I'm not sure which it is, but
I'm not at my usual location.
yeah. Yeah, so I understand if you don't want to do the singing there. Alrighty. Have we all run those? All three of the exercises? I've seen you do it well. So if Riley, do you guys need a bit more time? You can just thumbs up the camera if you want. Hold on. Thumbs up for more time. Thumbs down for.
No, I don't need any more time. I'm good.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
So let's move on to doing the 4 chord. All right. Same. Right, but what we're going to do it with is F chords. Oh, beautiful. Just give it vibrato. That'll fix it up. And again, same with the middle voice. It's kind of fun to try to keep the triads going for as long as possible while you're fingering the rest of the line. That way, what you actually get is triad and then extension mode, and triad and then extension mode, which sounds kind of cool. Looks like Will's going to join you, and it's like you guys always have like identical backdrops going on behind you.
Nah, so I got cold. I'm in front of the window now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Has been strangely like cold lately. Like 10-degree days up here.
Yeah, it was warm for like a week here, and then it's gone back to being cold
Yeah,
again.
just like snap colds. Yeah, crazy weather systems at the moment. Again, singing the lines, singing your top lines, or singing the voicing that you're focusing on moving. And once you've done that, which like we should be probably getting pretty close to running up and down that a couple times, looking at the last ones. The last one is just doing it all again on G chord. This one, I decided we would start on a B note instead of starting with a C note, so that way we can get most of the time the chords falling on the downbeat. We always have this problem, I'm assuming you've all noticed it, that when we get the 6, 7, 8 part of a scale relative to the chord, it pushes the chord onto like beat 4 instead of beat 3. And quite often the exercise feels better when we have, beat 1 and beat 3 as the chord tones. Whereas the way I've written this out, it kind of jumps. So like you'll get one that's like beat 1 and beat 3, and the next one will be beat 2 and beat 4. And that's because of the 6, 7, 8. Right? There's always this thing where the 7 is nearly there, where the 7 adds this kind of like this extra beat and displaces where the chord's going to go. So in some music styles, they would add in, say, 2 notes, or they might drop the 7. One of the reasons why, the 7 can kind of be avoided at times is that it kind of, if you include it, it pushes your line to being like 1 note longer than it really should be to hit the downbeat. Doesn't matter at all for this exercise, because this is more about driving home, the chord tones that harmonize with your bread and butter harmony, 1, 4, and 5. And after you've done that, a really interesting thing to do is to think about all these notes and harmonize every note in the scale, right? So like doing the top line, C, well that harmonizes with C. All right, D would be G, E would be C again, F would be F, G would be G, and then I like to hold G for a second because it also works with C. And then we get F, G, C. All right. right, so what do we do with this? Obviously, some familiarity with the exercise. Familiarity with the, I wouldn't say this is an exercise I've played particularly, but it is a concept that is worth thinking about. And every time I play it, I kind of construct it from concept. But what to do with it? Well, this is a great example of one of these things that is a fun thing to improvise with. So just using 1, 4, and 5 chords, we should take the top line, for instance, and improvise a melody. Everywhere where we can, we should drop in with a chord. Right? For one thing, it's probably not what you do a lot when you improvise, which is kind of doing more things where we're playing chords underneath a melody. For another, obviously that's only the first step in the exercise. The next one would be improvising on the middle voice, which is almost certainly something that you don't do too much. Right? And again with the lower voice. And eventually, like, it ends up becoming this thing where you cross voices naturally. Like, you kind of, I find that quite often I'll do something on the top strings and I want to answer them coming down through the voices. If I practice that for 5 minutes sitting here playing, you'd end up seeing it. But it's probably not an economical use of our time. Can anyone do it? So just worry about the top voice. Can anyone improvise on the top whilst continuing a chord change? Now, one of the things I would stress is I'm sure you noticed, but those chords, whenever I did one of those examples, did not change at the same time. They did change in logical places, but they changed in relation to the notes I was playing. Right, so I hear a melody which starts on C. Should have heard that G chord in my head. Right, so it's kind of like, it's a cooperative experience where I'm not forcing myself, I'm doing a 1, 4, 5 and I'm doing it on these chord changes. It's trying to drive home this idea that particular notes announce particular chords. And kind of this classical idea of, you don't have to change now just because we've done 3 bars. Like, that's a pop idea. We get this like rigid structure of 2 bars here, then 2 bars here, then 2 bars here. What I'm after you kind of experiencing and thinking about a little bit more of is building a melody and finding out where that melody naturally pushes you into a chord change. Anybody brave enough to have a go? Or do you want to have like a couple of minutes of trying to figure something out and then have a go? One way or another, you will have a go eventually. It's just whether or not we're prepped for it.
I don't know. Sometimes like I love Ted Green for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I've
that
got to admit that watching and being in love with Ted Green is kind of what prompts me to push people to do this kind of thing. It's way
yeah,
simpler than what Ted Green's doing.
yeah,
And
same
of course,
concept.
Ted Green quite often does it against Baroque changes.
Yeah, that improvisation.
Yeah, which is
That-
really fun, and that's fun because you get set up these calls and responses between voices. Um,
yeah.
you know, but starting somewhere basic, right? So go on, have a crack, Will. Give me a melody starting on a C chord,
I don't know.
and as you create the melody, eventually a chord change will happen in your head.
Okay.
All right, so like you don't start it out going, like probably you're going to change to the F chord first, just as a general rule of how melodies tend to work. But that doesn't matter. You could change to the G chord as your first change. It's mostly just about starting a melody. So
Yeah.
start on C, start fooling around. Every time you're in one of the inversions of C, drop the chord in.
Okay.
And eventually you will hit on a space where it's just obvious that the note you're about to go to is going to be on a change.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. Um. Yeah, I'm sort of thinking like Danny Boy or something like
Yeah, but no extra chords. We're just talking about triads. We're keeping it simple.
that was meant to be like a 1-6-2-5, but
Yeah. Don't play Danny Boy. Just play a melody. Improvise a melody.
yeah.
Because like, look, there are lots of different skills here, and the one that you're showcasing is one that will probably be part of the sight reading, which is, um, you know, finding where a melody sits inside of chords. That's good, but it doesn't necessarily teach you how to do it.
Yeah.
So jump in the rough end and improvise a crappy little melodies. Choose one of your inversions to start on, and just start moving the top line around.
Ah. Ah. No, it's not going anywhere there.
So I'd say that improvisationally speaking, I think the thing that you're not letting yourself do is like you're focusing too much on the chord changes themselves.
Yeah.
And again, like I think you could simplify a lot of what you're doing there. You're improvising across the top two strings to give yourself extra range.
Right.
Don't just use the B string,
Just use the beat.
and just think about it really simply. Right? There's not enough of you listening to the notes you're playing and responding to them. And we're not looking after anything flash. Like we are looking for simple melodies. Something you might just whistle to yourself while you're in the shower or something. Something silly. getting closer, right? I still think you're driving the chord changes really frequently.
Yeah, I'm playing too
And
much.
I think what you're doing is letting the chord changes shape your melody rather than letting your melody shape your chord changes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, like, for you, maybe the best exercise to start with would be don't play the chords. You've got a B
Yeah.
string. That was the chord change then, right? To the F. Everything else there was all on C.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
And it's not like for this particular kind of exercise, this way of kind of improving your improvisation, you want to kind of connect the idea that instead of forcing a chord change to happen, now forcing a chord change to happen will make something sound more musical, but from a compositional perspective, you usually, like, you don't always sit down with, okay, 2 bars of 1, 2 bars of 4. Quite often you start with a melody. You know, you've got this idea for lyrics in your head, or this idea for a melody, and you've got to figure out how to make that sit into chord progressions. Now, that's a good thought to have as someone who's an improviser, because what it requires you to do is listen a lot more to what you're doing. Develop an idea, make sure that it's melodic, make sure that it has a feel of a chord to it. So for you, just try that. Take a couple of minutes, solo only on the B string, and don't rely on a rigid structure of when to change. Right? Let it breathe a bit.
Yeah, I'll try that.
All right, Riley, you want to stab?
Sure thing. I done a weird one. I've done it on all the high string. I just try to challenge myself and do all the kind of melody on the high string, and kind of incorporate that into.
Did you redo the inversion so that they match on the high string?
Mm-hmm. Oh well, I've also incorporated kind of like 4 strings. So incorporating the old versions. Wait, so for example the F, but then add the high. Add the high. I know the dimension's so cool. So I just done this.
Okay, so overall, like what you're doing, most of it worked. There are some points there where I don't buy that was the chord you heard supporting those lines. And a couple of other points where I feel like you were thinking of the change more than you were thinking of the melody.
Okay.
If I had the recording here, I could just pinpoint exactly where they were. Again, it's not necessarily about worrying about getting to those chords at particular times. Like if you listen to classical music, quite often they'll change in interesting places in the bar. Because the harmony is following the melody, and the melody doesn't necessarily dictate that it will happen on beat 1. It's very hard for us to think in that way, especially because the last 50 years of music have been really, on the whole, focused in on changing in on beat 1, hitting things in simple 4-chord loops. I mean, especially these days, the prevalence of having 2 chord progressions in an entire song and it always has the same structure to it is kind of programming our ears in a certain way. But it's not the only way of thinking about melody and improvisation. And the downside with it is that quite often the melody you're developing, or the melody one is developing, not particularly attacking you, probably needed 4 extra notes or 3 extra notes to finish that line before the chord change happened.
Okay.
All right. So for what I'd like you to do is do the same exercise again. Start on the 1 chord, but I want you to play a melody and then let it continue as long as you can, or even that's the wrong angle. Continue playing a melody that you think sounds like something a singer might sing, and at a certain point in that, naturally, there will be a change that you hear, and it will be
Okay.
either 4 or 5 in this point. But it's like I was saying before with some of those other examples, right? Da. Went to the G chord this time. Okay? I didn't know what that progression was going to be when I started. The melody kind of told me these would be the points where the chords are changing.
Okay.
And I kind of let the melody be constructed as the first and foremost thing I'm focusing on. Right? Does it sound melodic? Does it sound like something someone might sing? Does it sound a bit like Danny Boy? Right? Like it's that kind of melody we're looking for at this stage. Obviously, the further you go with this, the more you push it, the more stylistic it becomes, the more advanced they become. But what you want to do is construct a melody first and foremost, and then pull the harmony underneath it as you're constructing that melody.
Okay.
Okay? With those notes in mind, give it a couple minutes and play around and see what you come up with. Alrighty, Ewan, how about you, mate?
Yeah, kind of something. I haven't gone as complex as Riley, and and to be honest, making someone go after William Kiss is a bit mean. Sure.
Look, complex is not the name of the game, right? Like,
I know.
I mean, we all want to do that. Like, you all see the best improviser around. You're like, oh man, like I immediately feel like I need to follow that up with something. What I would suggest is that if you are in a room with someone who intimidates you from their lines, your best bet is not to try to copy, and your best bet is to go with something that is more melodic. For one thing, audiences give way more of a shit 9 times out of 10 about something that's melodic than something that is technically interesting. And we lose sight of that a lot if we're into like metal particularly, but 80s rock and classic rock where we have these guitar virtuosos who take 6 minutes to do a solo, and that 6 minutes involves a whole bunch of different things. That is now an eclectic taste. Like that is now an acquired taste that a lot of people don't have, because we are listening to 4-chord loops that hit hard and harmony lines that hit hard. So most audiences are going to be more interested in something that is just a solid melody. And I guarantee you at a gig, if you do 4 solos in a row, like 4 songs back to back and each one's got a solo, if you do the first 3 with melodic stuff as your main focus and not flashy stuff, the 4th time when you do flashy stuff, it will hit much harder than if you've done all of them as flashy. And the audience will then really be on your side. It's like, wow, this guy plays a great melody. And then, wow, when he wants to, he's got an arsenal at his disposal. One thing, Ewan, careful of that pinky when you're doing those sweeping exercises, because
Yep.
developing rigid pinky syndrome, which hits all guitarists equally. Julian Bream's a proponent of like massive like erectile problems in his finger, but like it's really bad for your hand. It's just locking up parts of your hand. It actually makes it less likely to be able to move smoother. You want to keep them all in that nice ring position. Okay, Ewan, show me what you got with this idea. This concept.
Yeah. All right. Can you actually like hear that?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. So it's still just improv. I don't actually have a line. So.
Yeah. No, I want it to be improv. Like.
Okay.
It's about listening to yourself.
Yeah. Sloppy player.
So if we just go back one sec when you hit the 4 chord.
Yep. That one?
Yeah. That was a moment when I didn't think that was the chord you were after.
Okay.
Okay, you had this like da 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 da. And it's like it went like 5 ba da da da, should have been 1 but went to 4 instead. Ba da da
yeah.
da. So like this way you're kind of using the chords to drive your melody more than you're listening to the melody itself. All right. Like, you know, that's starting with a negative comment. Overall, like demonstration of the concept, pretty good, right? But development of that concept, how to get yourself further from where you are now, is going to be focused in much more on that melody. You know, like generally, you know, and you know, it's mean of me to put you all on the spot in many ways. You know, especially you've got a variety of amount of seasonings in how experienced you are with improvisation. But the thing that I'm trying to drive home here is listening to yourself a lot more. All right, it's not about your knowledge of the scale. It is about whether or not you are singing this line in your head along with it. And moments where you suddenly hear non sequitur chord changes, or moments where the melody does something strange, it doesn't necessarily sound melodic, is where you lost the thread in your head. It's a really similar thing to a drummer exercise that Benny Greb gives out. This is going to talk about rhythm for a second, but it's the same idea. You're playing a beat, all right, and you're doing fills. And Benny Greb, and this is something you can do on the guitar too, Benny Greb advocates for saying chip, 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 so you become your own metronome. And that's something is good to work on for while you're like, you know, practicing scales. Chip, 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 chip. Do you know where your downbeat is? All right. That's a rhythmic exercise. Definitely try it out sometime. If you're ever on a drum kit, it's a lot easier to do it because you don't have to think about pitch at the same time. But you can do it with your scale exercises like that, mixing your different subdivisions, and you keep screaming the downbeat. I guarantee it that the more complicated you try to make your sounds, the less likely you are to be able to keep that going, and you'll start displacing it. And it's the same on the drums. Usually people are great with the groove, great with basic fills, and then they go to try to do some kind of thing off a rudiment, and all of a sudden the beat gets displaced. We get like this kind of like clave rhythm instead of getting the downbeat. Now for drummers, that is how they pronounce melodies. Right? Their melodic pronunciation is, how do I tie these interesting concepts into a downbeat? For us, at the moment, we're worried about pitch. We're not really worried about rhythm so much, but the concept is the same. Can you track how this melody is playing out? Can you listen to yourself in such a way that you can hear what is melodic, what isn't? What becomes a random scale exercise that you've thrown together, or what becomes something which sounds like a song, right? And it all starts with listening to yourself to begin with. You don't need a plan. You don't need to say, I'm going to change the 4 chord first, right? It's not about that. It's about, as I'm playing, I'm listening to myself. Right? I had no plan there at all. What I started doing was starting. As soon as I heard that, I was like, oh yeah, ba-di-da, ba-da-da-da-da. Be-da, be-da. And initially I'm like, okay, immediately, that first one is a C chord, that time I hit that B, that's a G change. And they're actually the only 2 changes I needed. When I repeat it a second time, I'm actually like, when I go la da da da, that probably sounds nicer against a 4 chord. All right. Can you see how that melody implied those chords already? It is about what note I went to. Like obviously that F note is going to, you know, more strongly imply an F than a C chord because it's the root note. But not just that. It's about the shape of the melody. overall, those notes are mostly C notes, right? C, D, C, D, E for like a millisecond before we hit, right? Not only am I listening to that, there's an implication in those notes. Like when we have that, here's my motif, that little rocking backwards and forwards between 1 and 2 on the scale. I then have variation. Feels like about now I need to go back to my motif. I feel like a chord change probably needs to happen here, and I also need to have some new variation. So playing B really separates me from the C idea. Right? This is analysis that I'm doing subconsciously as I'm playing, right? Like I'm not actually thinking in these terms, but this is how you explain them back out as you extrapolate. What I'm doing is I hear a note and I start humming in my head. And it's what turns it into something that is melodic. All right? It's a tough concept to get your head around in terms of if that's not normally how you play, then it feels a lot like an uphill battle and it feels really intimidating. It is how all of the best players in any genre play. I mean, that's really what it is to, all those metaphors and things like, play from the heart and all that kind of stuff. That's what it is to hear your melodies. I don't necessarily think that if someone said hum a melody on C, that's what I would have come up with in my head. Part of it is suggested by my hands, but I am listening to it and constantly responding to it. All right? So let's cycle back to the top. Will, have another crack.
Okay.
So remember, and look, if necessary, just start on one note and play it a couple of times. Then you get an idea. Right? And that started with just taking a breath, playing that note a few times, and then thinking, what do I hear, movement-wise?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'll start. Yeah, I'm thinking about your melody now, so I'm gonna just try and.
You can use that as a basis if you want. You can rip off things.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah. Okay.
Otherwise, just choose a different note on one of the different top notes. Like come up
Yeah.
here to G.
Okay. Yeah. That's okay.
Okay, really good. Can you do something similar this time and include some harmony? Because that was a much better melody than what you were playing last round.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. I'll just.
There was a point there where I'm like, ooh, did he mean to go to F? It sounded like it was too early, but you made the rest of the melody make sense in reference to that. So I think you were hearing more of it. So this time, see if you can support it as well with chords.
Okay. Yeah, I'm still hearing like 1, 4, 5 in my head. Trying to outline that. I might have gone to the F as like a seventh of the G even, but it was probably going to the 4 chord. I don't remember what I played now, but I'll play something else. That's all right now.
Okay, the last bit there at the end is where it went off the rails. Did you feel that?
That didn't work.
Yeah, and it's because all of a sudden you announced the G change before we'd earned it.
I hit that B like on the end of 4 or something. It just didn't work. I don't know.
I think it was a D actually. That because you dwelt on this D a couple of times, like it was about 6 notes earlier than that. It implied that the G change had suddenly arrived.
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
But the start of that was much more melodic and much more kind of like what we're talking about. Give it another shot.
Okay. I don't know.
Yeah, no. I think that's solid groundwork.
Okay.
And definitely for you, like in your own practice, when you take this concept to play with it more, I would worry less about your chord changes and worry
Yep.
more about constructing a melody,
Mhm.
because you have no problems hearing harmony, right? That's not, for a lot of people, that's the big bridge to gap. Like the number one question I get when people start composing is, I've got a melody, but how do I harmonize this thing?
Mhm.
And I don't think that's going to be your problem. What I think probably will be your problem is constructing a melody that the chord change doesn't feel forced in.
Yeah.
So doing more of this, what you did then was a huge improvement off the first round.
Mhm.
So I think letting it breathe, letting the melody develop itself. And sometimes, sometimes that actually means that the melody is going to sit on the one chord for way longer than you might think about it.
Yeah.
Like usually when you plan these things from an improvisational perspective, we get really caught in with, 4 bars of 1. And like there's this little thing inside us that is like, I'm coming up to bar 4, I've got to change.
Yep.
But doing that can lead to, doesn't always, but can lead to things that sound a bit like a non sequitur. Like
Mm.
C's developing, ba 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 da da ba da ba da ba da ba da ba da ba da, and all of a sudden the chord changes. So I was like, oh, I probably need another bar before that melody naturally closed.
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, definitely a good improvement from where we started. Who's up next, Riley?
Sure, I'll give it a shot. I don't know. I'm just trying to come up with it as I go.
Okay, so that change, I don't think that change happened with that melody.
Okay. So I was there. Again?
It's not that it necessarily couldn't have happened. It's just that I don't think that that's what that melody was announcing.
Okay. I'm just trying to.
It's a kind of it's a tricky concept to get in the middle of, because obviously all of these notes harmonize with these chords, and if you go to one of the notes that is inside of this next chord change, then technically it works. It's about whether or not the melody itself pointed you in that direction.
Okay.
In many ways, good melodies are these kind of games we play with an audience, where the first 3 notes you kind of then can predict what the next 3 notes will be, or when that change is going to come up. Which again, I think would be better off. For one thing, with your melodies both times now, they don't repeat enough. I think you could work on motivic development a little bit. Start with a simple concept and then do a variation, or start with a simple concept and answer that concept. So right. So you can hear I've got this kind of motif. Answer. You could have predicted what that answer was going to be as soon as you heard that first one. You can see how that first melody, the first part of the melody, announced the second half in a way. Obviously, there were different ways we could have gone with that. This is one of the tricky things about trying to teach this concept. Is like, yeah, there's a million answers, but hopefully you can hear that when I played that, each section of the melody kind of made sense, right? Like it kind of, by virtue of it being there, is announcing what the next thing is going to be. So what you've got to learn how to do is announce where the change is going to be, right? So far it's all been C. So you can hear how, one, the motivic development was there. There was a similar shape when I moved to the G chord. The things that were all on C still felt all connected and felt like each part of the melody announced the next part of the melody, or it had some kind of relationship between the different sections, the different phrases. And then when I did move to another chord, it makes sense where those harmony changes happen, right? So things that I'm using to help that are motivic development. I'll use a similar shape between two things. I'll use call and response, you know. Right? That time I threw in a load of chord changes across that last bit, but because of the way I was constructing those melodies, it kind of made sense. You know, you could have probably, if I had played that line without playing the harmony behind them, you would have had a similar idea about what that harmony would have been. Yeah? A lot of it is about listening to yourself and Ewan's laptop crashed. Yeah, a lot of it is about listening and developing a concept more than freaking out too much about covering too much of your scale. You know, it's really about listening to yourself. Do you want to have a stab at it, or we go back to Will and get him to do it, and then we'll get you again afterwards?
Go back to me afterwards.
Okay. Will, your turn. Let's hear some motivic development.
Okay. Sure.
So step one, start on some kind of note of C, play a few notes, and I would say think about it in call and response. So play 3 notes or 3 or 4 notes, something that you like, a little phrase, and then play most of the phrase the same way, but vary the ending.
Okay. Yep.
You've already had a chord change. Right? Let's just hear motivic development on one chord. So let's just hear it on a C chord.
Yeah, okay. On just the C chord?
Yeah.
Okay. Alright.
Now I hear a chord change, right?
Yeah.
La da da dum, blah ba ba da, right? So yeah, okay. Do a similar thing. This time, when you get up to a point where it feels like there's going to be a natural tick over to a chord change, see if you can then use a similar motif to what you used on the C, but on the next chord. Whether or not that's 4 or 5 doesn't matter.
Okay. Yeah. We'll see if I can remember. I just. So that would be.
Okay, so you didn't extend the C motif into F, but the melody was starting to make more sense.
Yeah.
Right, so this is definitely a step in kind of the right kind of direction.
Okay.
But one of the things that you should also try to do is compositionally, if you set up some kind of motif on the one chord, see if you can carry that straight into the four chord. Doesn't necessarily have to be on the same intervals or the same chord relationship. You know, like so you can hear there how that really tied the C and F changes together. The F change made sense. I was doing it, you know, sooner than you were looking for, and sooner than I was encouraging you for. But when I did play the F change, because I used the same kind of shape, right? I didn't use the same notes, same positions in the chord, but the same kind of shape. Da, dee, da, da, ba. So when I hit the F, right? It starts tying together this melody that I'm constructing. All right, and it's very much what most people at about you guys-ish levels-ish, even though you're all at different levels, but like, you know, block you guys, first year uni students, lack in their soloing. It's certainly something I've lacked in my soloing for years. It's this idea of paying enough attention to what I'm playing that I can construct it like a melody, right? It's one of the things that will hook audiences. It's the thing that will make your solos, you know, things that you're really proud of, is taking these concepts and applying them to the stuff you're playing already, right? Like if we're playing a blues, you need to have some kind of motivic development in it. If you just keep playing licks off every chord, you might sound pretty cool, but you will never sound as cool as the coolest guys out there, right? Really good players still use this concept as a way of developing their solos,
Yeah.
right?
Let's
And it's a weirdly different mindset to get yourself into, all right? Especially if you've already got all of your chops together and you can play a whole bunch of stuff. Right? It's the difference between guys who string licks together and the guys who write solos. You know, it's also a good way of you kind of structuring a trajectory for your practice. Obviously, you're the person who has final say on whether or not anything sounded good. But when you practice improvising, these are the things that you do to practice improvising and not just sit there and improvise. Because they're slightly different ideas. I'm super guilty of spending a lot of time just improvising and not probably quite enough time of practicing improvising, practicing the concepts of melody, practicing developing ideas and really listening to myself. So it's what you've got to start doing in order to kind of push your improvisation into things that sound better and better and better. Riley, have a stab.
Okay. So kind of stick on the one chord for a while. Is that what you're kind of saying? A bit of.
Well, okay, think about it this way. Establish a motif.
Okay.
Okay, so a motif is going to be a few notes that work on the one chord. I wouldn't want to put a rule on it like sit on the one chord for a while, but don't force a chord change. Right? The thing that should announce when the chord change happens is the melody itself. It needs to announce, I'm coming up to a change, you know. In the same way that when we're playing a blues, when the four chord's coming up, we feel that change bars ahead. We're like, oh, it's coming up. I know this thing's going to happen, right? That's what we want your melody to do for us. This idea that, oh yeah, you know, I've heard that development. It's developed a couple of times. It's sounding cool. Ooh, an idea is coming up. Here it is.
Okay. Okay.
I feel like that one should have been the 5 change.
Yeah. Okay. Like that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's develop that a little bit. You had a kind of it's almost like a lullaby kind of feel, right?
Okay.
So if we have that, see how I developed that idea? You start with that idea, and then you make that melody announce the next change. Ya ba ba, ya ba ba be ba, ya ba da ba. Still using the same notes, but the way I played them with the rhythms announced where that change would happen.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, have another stab. Again, what I'm really liking that I can hear is that the concept of what I'm talking about is sinking in. I'm not expecting you to nail it.
Okay.
Right? Like, nailing it will come with time and playing with these ideas in your own time.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, parts of that, the end part particularly, that melody was really good at announcing where that 5 change is going to be. I feel like after you did the first melody line, then the variation, and the first melody line again, we probably needed to change to the 4 chord.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I think you got stuck on the 1 chord. You came up to G up here. And it probably should have been something like that. But because you played
Okay.
the G, it's like, I feel like I have to still be on that 1 chord. And then we had the 1 chord extend further than it probably
Should
was
have.
implied by the lullaby kind of feel. Right?
Okay.
But generally, I think the concepts are starting to work. Hopefully you can hear a difference too.
Yeah. Definitely.
Okay, Will, your turn again.
Oh, sorry, is that? Oh, yeah, I clicked it.
Sweet.
Okay.
I felt like everything up until about that point was going really well.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like, I think you know that too, because there was this. You had this kind of like, that slight bad spell look on your face. You're like, ooh,
Yeah.
is that where I meant this to go?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think started very strong.
Okay.
Started very strong with this idea of that chord change flowed very naturally. It wasn't necessarily a predictable pattern. I think the moment that it kind of diverted a little bit, I thought as you played the melody that was coming to the 5 chord, I thought it was going to go down. Something about the way that the rest of the melody had structured before that point, I was hearing this inversion. And when you came up to this one, I'm like, oh, interesting. So where's he going to go from here? And I think you had the same shock.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you weren't quite expecting it to be there, and you're like, ooh, and then the wheels fell off. Have another stab.
Yeah, I tried to sequence like the 5 chord as well, or like the motif on it, and I was too high maybe or something.
Yeah. I think that's why I was expecting it to go lower again. It's just like, oh, that would have been easier to mirror there.
Yeah, yep.
It's hard to say because I have to do it in retrospect after like responding to it.
Yep.
But I can say that for sure that where you went up to the G, I was thinking, oh, he's going to go down.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Overall, very different melody, many more chord changes in that one. I think it tied together quite nicely. You had this kind of extending motif across the 1 and 4 chords on the return, and then coming to the 5. Yeah, pretty good. Do another one. Something different.
Okay. Yep. Yeah, I used the same like intervallic movement on that, but I was, instead of starting on the 3, I started on the 5. But,
Yeah, I also quite liked. I think you used like a flat 5 or something against the 1 chord. There was a couple of fruity notes. Like you dwelt on the major 7, and then you dwelt on. There's something like that, and it worked for me.
I don't know if that was intentional, but I'll run with it.
Well, you did it twice, so I'm like, yeah, he means it, and it worked.
Yeah. If you play it twice, it's not wrong.
Yeah. Just repeat mistakes. Okay, so yeah, that was really good. That last bit, that really spelled it out. Interestingly, you're getting a preference for the chord changes that cycle more often.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
you're getting a preference for things that are like, yeah. You know, things that you're changing chord almost every bar. That's fine, obviously. Like, you should try structuring these in lots of different ways. If you start hearing that, obviously hit that note for a while in your practice until you feel like you can do that really reliably, and then push yourself to go in some other direction. You know, where you let one of the chords carry on for a long time.
Yeah, well, that's something I think about pretty often, because it's not something I can necessarily hear straight away. But even if I just sit down and I go, and I just hold it for 1 bar more, and instead of going back to the 1 here, I hold it. Like, it's something that is like, I'm trying to think more about that rather than just sticking to what I'm hearing, which
Yeah,
might be sort of
I've always
vocally
had a
like,
fear in blues songs of 1 chord solos.
yeah,
There's a few famous
yeah.
songs. Lay Down Sally is one that comes out of gigs all the time. It's not a great song, but it has just this. And the thing is that I find really, really difficult is I even think Clapton's solo sucks.
Yeah.
You know, like, it just sounds like he's sitting there going, here's an A chord, and here's some ideas on A, and then here's another A chord, and here's some ideas on A, and it doesn't develop. So
Yeah.
I can relate to that a lot. I think a lot of melody for me, or in a lot of things that stimulate me, is the transition, the melody created by the change of chords.
Yeah. And how long you hold like a chord for. Like, maybe it's longer than expected, but then if I hold it for like 2 bars longer than expected, then I'm thinking of some other song now that has that sort of change. Like, I don't really
Yeah,
listen to country or bluegrass or anything, but that's sort of what I hear. Like, I don't
yeah.
know.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I find it difficult myself, which is one of the reasons why you got to practice it, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, I still haven't yet found a way of making just in a blues context just a 1 chord solo sound really cool without breaking the concepts right down and going to like triad pairs or something, or playing shadow progressions.
Yeah, like implying something. Like,
Yeah,
sorry, what were you saying?
um, yeah. So yeah, I can totally get that. If cycling the chords helps you um, create more cohesive melodies, then that's something I would hit for a while, and
Mhm.
you know, be totally cool with doing that for a while. One of the ones I was having fun with recently is doing like a reverse progression where you start on D. So like if it's in A, you start on E or something, you know, like. And you got to like string. Trying to So it's kind of almost like I'm thinking of soloing in the key of E. Yeah, and trying to make that string together. So like even just taking those 1, 4, 5 chords and just like stringing them in different cycles.
Yeah.
And trying to think of different melodic lines that then make sense against those other cycles, because the ones that you're used to using, like if you're used to using it in straight blues format, you'll have a particular set of licks that you always rely on. And particular transitions that you always rely on. And it's funny that just changing the chord order, you know, doing it from the bridge where you start on the 4. You know, like have to finish it. You know, doing it in those odd orders will then present different melodic construction challenges for you.
Yeah.
You know? And it's always this same idea. Like when you record yourself and play it back, even when you're playing stuff in a genre like that, does it have motivic development? Did it make sense? Were they just non sequitur lines? Because a thing that we normally jump in on is like. And it's like, it's okay. It's very obviously that like I'm using the same shape and sliding it up, and like it could get worse than that. Like a lot of the time with blues players, they just like roughly transition. Because like I can only ever see that 4 chord change from the root note, so I always start the line on the root note, and it's like, ooh, I don't feel like would just jump over an octave down to the bass note there. You know, like. See, that's a much better change because we had the D. Coming down to the 5th of A. Because it was all close together and very near what I was doing, those melodies, those 2 chord change melodies fit in together much better than if I suddenly leapt down to hit a note that I know. All right, Riley, you want to have your? Oh man, we are way over time. Do you guys need to be somewhere? Riley, have one more stab, and we might wrap it up.
Okay, I'll just have one more stab.
So obviously went back down to the 1. You just start the whole cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look. I think the idea is starting to rub off and get under your fingers. Obviously, what you need to do is sit there for like an hour and play with the concept, play with this idea of motivic development. There was a couple points there where you surprised me, right? Like the melody you played, I don't know how intentional it was, but the melody you played, I think on the 4 chord, hung for like 2 extra bars than I was expecting. It didn't feel off because of the melody you used. But as soon as you played that first 2 bars, I'm like, here's the oh shit, no, changes. Oh, there it is. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. You know. So yeah, I think that's the bread and butter of it.
Okay.
Right? There might be a little bit of this put into the exam. There will definitely be some kind of improvisational component that I'm going to ask for. Some amount of reading chords, some amount of reading your inversions, a little bit of sight reading, a little bit of talk about extensions.
And that's in 2 weeks, correct?
That'll be in 2 weeks. Yeah, I'm going to send out an email about it probably next week, so that way everyone has roughly similar times to kind of study for. And it'll be a thing where you'll have to book in a time slot because I'll have to do multiple calls through the day because I can't do it with everyone en masse. So I'll send out a big bulk email saying, these are the topics. Hit me up with emails and we'll organize a time. I think it'll probably, I'm trying to aim for probably about a 7 to 10 minute test and a 15-minute time window for it. Because it usually takes a little longer, and I don't like to cut people off immediately on the dot if I feel like you might be able to get a couple of extra marks.
Okay.
So pretty much, it will mostly be focusing on anything we've talked about this semester. I doubt I'm going to do a lot from the stuff in the previous semester. I would like to, but in the time constraints, it's going to be pretty difficult to pack all of that in. So mostly about triads. There will definitely be something about like demonstrate your triads on these chords. So if you're still not up on your triads at that level, that's definitely some places where you could score some marks. But then there also might be a chord progression where I say throw in some extensions and talk to me about the extensions you used.
Okay.
Alrighty, guys. Well, if you want to continue the chat at any other point, shoot me up. I'd be more than happy to meet up and have a chat. Otherwise, play with motivic development. Alright, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Catch you in the next one.
Catch ya. See ya.